is a lifelong student of German military and maritime history, and is the author of An Honorable Gentleman, which is a submarine story from the German point of view. It has been described as being the tradition of Das Buch and the Hunt for Red October. He grew up in South Carolina and is a graduate of Tulane University. An Honorable Gentleman is his first. An Honorable German is his first novel. It's right here in front of me, too.
But if you want to mix me up with Walter Percy's The Last Gentleman, please do so, because I went to Tulane. Walter Percy was still alive when I was there, and most of Walter Percy's novels are about young men of Tulane, suffering angst. So, of course, we read them all and had them in obviously English classes. So, if you want to do that, that's fine. I'll just scribble my name so you can't read it. But my name is Charles McCain. When I did my novel in German, this is my copy of my conference job. So what I thought I'd do is just talk briefly about my novel, do a reading, and questions. And I would like to say, as I tell every audience I talk to, this is one of the few, if not the only World War II epic written from the German point of view by an American, actually my German friends don't know the German did it. Of course, partly that's, nobody was stupid enough to spend so many decades researching how we set out to do that. But there is a big difference between novel and the novelist, please, because have people email my Facebook site and say, "Are you a Nazi? Because I'd like to read this book." But if you're a Nazi, I don't want to. Well, I could just lie. I mean, if I work, so I always say, actually I'm quite liberal politically. I hate the Nazis. People find it believable. People find it very believable. I think that's a skill, that's what my skill of what I was doing, and it's certainly not my political point of view. And this is what happened. I was in the Tulane University library. I might be here college. And I went to the library to study, and next to me on a reshelving part, more interesting school books, was a Time magazine from 1944. And I flipped through it. And I came across a story about a group of German POWs who had been formerly U-boat, had been on a German U-boat, captured, tunneled out of a prison camp in Phoenix, Arizona. I didn't know there were German POWs in the United States. I thought when U-boats sank, everybody drowned. And I was kind of like, this would make a great novel. And, I'm a smart guy. How hard can this be? So 32 years later, sitting longer than I thought. When I actually wrote the novel first in the early 80s, and then my life took a different direction. That's how I originally got this idea. I began to research, and I had this kind of fun thing happen on my website, because the beginning of the book is about the raiding cruise that the Admiral Brash made. It has something in there. Somebody emailed me and said, "Well, where did you find that?" Dope. And I usually my assistant Ted emails to people that say it's all things to me, but I couldn't resist. I emailed the guy back and said, "Well, the senior navigation officer of the Grashway told me that on a letter in 1981, but he could have it wrong." I mean, you might be right, but I did correspond with people like that. His main complaint was the senior navigation officer of the Grashway, which the Americans had stolen his scrapbook when he was going back to Germany. And it took all of my sort of self-composure not to write it back. All these millions of people died, all these Nazis did all these horrible things. The only thing you're mad about is the guards stole your scrap. You go to hell, I never want to. I just thank you for your letter. So, when I first wrote it, I realized it sounded too American. And so I really have to know a lot about German history to write this. And it's kind of long I realized I have to know about German history to be a German practically, and I'm arguing. I have to know about German history to correct Germans about their own history, which I feel like I love that. And they're like, well, gee. And I was very fortunate to meet on the Deutsche Kriegsmarine Forum a gentleman who had recently retired from the Deutsche Marine, who had served for 34 years in the Deutsche Marine, previously with the Marine. And his late father had served in the Kriegsmarine. And his first question to me was, "What did you think of the movie U-571?" And I emailed him and I said, "That was the worst." most inaccurate. My friends had to physically restrain me from standing up in the middle of the movie going, "This is completely wrong." And he said, "Okay, I'll help." Because he said, "I just ground my teeth through the whole thing." And the depiction of everything about the German U-boat is just completely wrong. In fact, the movie was so accurate, for I think the only time ever the chief of U.S. Naval History issued a statement saying it was actually completely inaccurate, which is highly unusual. So I was fortunate to meet my friend Jurgen, my friend called, and he helped me with lots of little details, which I just, you just wouldn't never have done it, and that was very, very useful to me. I haven't actually been in the Navy or the military. I don't spend a lot of time at sea, but I've never commanded a German U-boat, and a U-boat officer read it and said, "Wow, that's accurate." So, murder mystery writers are usually not murderers, so it's my hope to imagine this kind of thing. And so it just took, I read so much German history that a friend of mine, that I have his name in the acknowledgements, I said he became an expert on the German Navy, but he didn't want to be. It was just listening to me. And one day he worked for the government. He called me and said, "You can't talk about this anymore. You can't talk any German history." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I was in the meeting and somebody suggested something, and I said, if we do that, we'll get bogged down like the Germans on the Eastern Front." And everybody looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Okay, I'll listen." So you have to learn World War II and learn the history. And this one brief story that has to do with this book y'all have written about the American submarines in the Pacific. There exists in this country, the longest living urban legend in America is the German U-boat men. Is the longest living urban legend in America. I'll give y'all a discount on obviously. The longest living urban legend in America is that German U-boat men, in the 2 years that the United States was not in World War II, the British would come ashore in the U.S. and first go to the movies. Now this occurs in so many stories and memoirs of the time by Americans that you get the feeling that people join the German U-boat often to see American film. I mean, it's just a constant theme, and people reporting all this, but of course it's just totally untrue. And I wrote something about this for a submarine website, and this is the story. So I used to be in the banking business in Florida and Palm Beach, and I had a colleague who'd grown up in Palm Beach. He was much older than I was, and he's still much older than I am. And his family lived there, his grandfather, and he said, the German U-boat, and they used to come ashore and they would go to Taboo on North Avenue for an evening of dinner and drinks and dancing. He said the officers would do that. And I said, that's completely wrong. My grandmother knew these people. He saw them all the time. They exchanged addresses and stuff. I just said, boy, that's completely wrong. I mean, that never happened. And he said, well, what do you know? Were you there? I mean, my grandfather was here. He was here. He used to go over to North Avenue to Taboo and see these men all the time in their dress uniforms. And I just said, who wants to consult my grandfather, for Pete's sake? And the guy that passed, I said, you know what? I'm sure I'm wrong. But first place, the dress uniform of German officers from World War II, it was a frock coat that came below their knees. And can you imagine, they only had a rubber dinghy on the U-boat. So can you imagine 2 men in frock coats with swords trying to climb into a rubber dinghy like this and paddle it through the surf and then go and not be wet and then have plenty of American currency, which was totally illegal to even possess in the Third Reich. I mean, it's just incredible. I hear these stories all the time, and I was at a family reunion 2 years ago, and a friend of one of my cousins said, we honeymooned in Veracruz, and we went to a hotel there, and the maitre d' said that U.S. submarine command, submarine officers, and German submarine officers would come ashore, and they would both eat in the dining room and just separate ends. And they told us that was, it happened all the time. That's totally impossible. And there were no American submarines, in the Gulf of Mexico, unless they were in transit from a shipyard or something. I said, well, American submarines in the Pacific. I said, so, except for that brief time, I guess, in Scotland. And, so that's impossible. I mean, that's just impossible. And